Hello, hello! Welcome back, guys, to the Musings of Maverick channel. This has been your host, Maverick, and today we're going to be watching the finale of Steins Gate 0. So, it all leads up to this, with this episode, we will be finished with the Steins Gate franchise, at least in terms of the animation, right? Well, so last episode, we bid our farewell to Amadias Karisu. Sad farewell to be sure. Like, I know, her character wasn't all that well developed in this season, in this series, but still, it's the thought that counts, right? And that's really the whole sum of this series as well, because obviously we already know how it's going to end. It's the journey to get there that's the intriguing part. And yeah, I honestly don't know. With one episode left, how exactly are they going to make it, go all the way back to what should have been with the original episode 23, right? I mean, with the end of last episode, obviously the timelines changed. They've done something to shift the timelines, but and then? Like, is that enough to break convergence or whatnot? I presume so, otherwise we're really getting nowhere, right? So, in any case, let's get into the episode, and at the very end I will also give my thoughts and conclusions on the Steins Gate 0 series. So, let's get right into it. Alright, let's begin in 3, 2, 1, play. Now you might notice my layout is a little bit different, my settings are a little bit different. I just recently upgraded my computer, so... Well, not really upgraded my computer, just the operating system. hmm. 777. Okay. So what about the original Steins Gate timeline? What? Wait, oh, Kagari. Looking at the red hair, I'm like, Kurisu? Oh. Professor. Alright, right into the action. Alright. Oh. Why would changing Amadius alter the fact that she was brainwashed? That doesn't... Oh, you're still shot? What? Oh, damn. Which is
私がママと出会えたことをなかったことにするの。係長、そんなの私は嫌だ。どんなひどい未来だって私にとってはたった一つの大切な未来なんだ。
okay. They both can't pull the trigger. Why do I feel like I'm watching an abridged version or something? Yeah, everybody has it. They just don't know if they changed it or not. I wonder if Kagari, like, has, you know, in the proper Steinsgate timeline, she probably has her own parents. I mean, I'm assuming that she's orphaned because of the war. I... What? What? Let's see, is the Apache helicopter gonna show up? Just go already. Come on, come on. No time. I mean, I'm assuming she's probably going to meet her in the future, just in different circumstances, I guess. Yeah, so the helicopter is still going to come. What? Wait, what? Why? What's the difference? uh, kind of funny. Oh? Wait, you can do that? What? Joey and Kilmo was born because of Mayurii, right? Remember, we made this character cheer up. Man, it's been such a long time. So where are they going? I think you caused enough of a paradox already by talking to your son. Oh, so is this the source of Okabe's dreams? I seem to recall that in some of Okabe's visions or whatnot, when these two were like in time of dinosaurs or whatnot. Yeah.
閉じないで。諦めないで。法院京馬を殺さないで。そうすれば思いはきっと届くから。何百何千という時間を旅してきたあの星の光みたいに、マユシーはあのラボでいつだってあなたを、みんなを待っているから。シュタインズゲートで会おうね。大丈夫。これはおじさんの血じゃないから。オカリン、オカリンの携帯だ。開けて。
Yeah, so what? How? Why?
テレビを見ろ。
テレビ？中町博士を乗せた飛行機は貨物室に火災を起こしながらもかろうじて亡命先のロシアに着陸した模様です。マユシーのメタルウーパー。でもなんでロシアに？
あの論文が全ての始まりなんだ。これをきっかけに大国間で熾烈なタイムマシン開発競争が始まる。そして世界大戦に発展する。57億人の命がかかってるの。マキセ・クリスを救って世界線を変えて。
無理だよ。前入りの時と同じなんだよ。どんなにあがこうが結果は変わらない。
法院京馬が生み出された瞬間のことを思い出して。
クリスは死ぬんだ。俺には分かってるんだ。この時間の輪がどれだけ不条理にできているか、どれだけ残酷な結末を用意しているか。分かっていた。分かっていたんだ。こうなるって。もう疲れた。疲れたよ。
Well, and with this music. Yeah, so what? Huh. What? I don't.
クリスを救うことに失敗したということだな。さぞ辛かっただろう。だがその辛さが俺に執念を与えた。だからなかったことにするわけにはいかなかったのだ。
Okay. So it really wasn't. No, it really was that far into the future.
シュタインズゲートと名付けたのも俺だ。なぜその名なのかもお前ならわかるはずだ。特に意味はない。そうだろ。
ねえ、あれでいいの？
多分ね。
2010年の岡部倫太郎は恥ずかしがらないかしら。
大丈夫。その頃はもっとすごかったから。
Alright, so they make it so Mahal actually meets up with them in the future. But no, wait, that's this timeline. Not the Steinsgate timeline, right? This would be the Alpha timeline, right?
シュタインズゲートに到達するための条件だ。健闘を祈る。エル、プサイ、コングル。
はい、これでバッチリだにゃ。
あとは D メールと一緒に過去へ転送。ルカ。
はい。今撮ったビデオメールは2010年の京馬さんに。さっき撮ったイタルさんのは京馬さんが旅立った後に2011年の鈴葉ちゃんにですね。
本当にいいの？
どうした？
だってタイムマシンの試作機でいきなり有人実験だなんて。あなたが死ぬと言われた2025年は今年だからって自分から死にに行くみたいなこと。
俺はそんなつもりは毛頭ないぞ。絶対に成功すると信じている。
でも
こう解釈できないか？ 2025 年岡部倫太郎は死んだのではなく、記念すべきタイムマシン初号機に乗って別の時空間へ旅立った。この世界線から消えるということは
Same as dying. Yeah.
すごいポジティブシンキングね。
だが仮説としてはありだろ。世界は騙せる。みんな今日までよくついてきてくれた。これより2011年のあの日、過去へ飛び立ったまま行方不明になっているマユリたちを見つけ出すために出発する。カーブラックホールトレーサーがきっと2人のローカスを見つけ出し、俺をたどり着かせてくれるはずだ。
オカリンさん、これを。
いいのか。
はい、絶対に渡してください。ママ。
わかった。
Ah, eh.
もう一度だけ聞かせて。シュタインズゲートは本当にあると思う？
あるさ。絶対。
Yeah,
これよりオペレーションを
bah.
作戦名はオペレーションアルタイル。
I guess this ties in with what I was originally hypothesizing in the original Steins
可
Gate.
能にする人ですから。
それでこそ僕らのオカリンなわけでね。
We're basically, you know, essentially the first version of him. Now, throughout all the timelines, there has to be one who made the beginning, right?
終わりはない。無限。星にもまた始まりはあるが、自らの力を持って滅びゆく。有限。英知を持つ者こそ最も愚かであるのは、歴史からも読み取れる。海に生ける魚は陸の世界を知らない。
I wouldn't say the universe is infinite. There is something like called the heat death of the universe, you know.
人間が光の速さを超えるのは、魚たちが陸で生活を始めるよりも滑稽。これはそんな
And fish did eventually live on land. They turned into amphibians, and then... Sorry, I'm just arguing semantics here. What? Alright, fine. We get the ending credit scene first. Right. I mean, since we are going all the way to the end already, let me just wait here. Enjoy the music and whatnot. I don't know, man. I feel like for... And yeah, hacking to the gate. I feel like for this season, this series, you really have to just go with the flow and don't think too much in regards to the time travel aspects and whatnot. Alright, there we go. Alright. But you know, he literally didn't have to do this. I mean, it makes for an epic scene, I'll admit that. I fully admit that. Like, look at Okabe being all badass over here. But It's actually not necessary at all once they reach the Steinsgate timeline, because this future never exists. Then I guess they don't really know that, but still. And there we go. The end. And there we go. We have finished Steinsgate 0 and thus the franchise as a whole. So, let me first preface this by saying that I totally get why they had that ending scene there with Okabe going there to rescue Suzuha and Mayurii. Now, I have my problems with that scene because I don't think it's necessary, but I could totally understand why they want to put that there, right? It's epic and whatnot, and it serves as a good ending to the entire series as a whole. Now, so let's just jump into it, right? Let's talk a little bit about this episode first. Well, can we even do it like that though? Because everything is interconnected in some way. Like, you know, throughout this episode, I will quickly comment and say that I was kind of, you know, racking my brains as to a few key parts here. Like, for instance, how come in this particular instance Kaguri was not under the professor's control. Although I guess in the original, sorry, not in the original, but like when Okabe was doing this for the first time, Kaguri eventually broke free of control, right? So I guess that you can't really say that's unprecedented. But like, for instance, what changed to the timeline that caused the missile to not hit the time machine, right? Like, why is it that Okabe was so sure convergence was broken in that instance? It's not like they did anything particularly different. I mean, sure, Amadeus did not exist anymore and so on and so forth, but like, you know, what is the deal there? How come that was the key to breaking the convergence on that point and allowing the missile to always hit the time machine? Like, I mean, I guess it's just a case of don't question it, just accept it, but still, you know, those are the type of things that gets me thinking, and that causes me to lose my concentration on the story at hand. Now, let's talk a little bit about the overall, how should I say it? Let's talk a little bit about the overall time travel aspect of this first. Now, for those of you who have been following my reactions for, you know, throughout the original Steins Gate up to now, which I presume would be nearly 100% of you, I highly doubt that there's anybody who picked up this series, you know, just for Steins Gate 0 itself. So you guys have probably already heard me mention this several times, but, you know, just as a quick reminder, and you guys feel free to skip this if you want to. And that is, you know, my entire argument against the sort of plausibility and how should I say, the internal logic of the time travel of Steins Gate, right? Now, I totally understand that there needs to be a first Okabe that puts everything into motion, right? Like, for instance, if time is linear, then there has to be some Okabe somewhere down the line who makes this decision first that he wants to change something in regards to this timeline, and so he goes and does it, right? And so that could conceivably be the entire story of Steins Gate and Steins Gate 0, right? To break the convergence in such a way and to eventually reach the Steins Gate timeline. Now, the whole thing that I have here, and why I feel like, you know, even the original Steins Gate, the theory behind it was kind of flawed, is according to its own internal logic, how time travel works by altering memories within Steins Gate. Now, multiple timelines cannot coexist. And what I'm saying here is that you cannot have an alpha timeline and beta timeline and a Steins Gate timeline running at the same time, right? Once you reach a particular timeline, that is it. That is it. You don't get to travel from the future from another sort of timeline and then travel to the past and go to, you don't get to go from the future of the alpha timeline to the past of the beta timeline, right? It doesn't work that way. It's either that or that. You can't have all at the same time. And so, one of my original arguments was that once Okabe actually reached the Steinsgate timeline, everything would be a wash, right? There would be no sort of past of him traveling to all the different alpha and beta and timelines and so on and so forth, and instead it would be, always have been self-contained within the Steinsgate timeline. And that's why I was saying that what's happened at the very end here was sort of, even though it was epic and all, it's actually superfluous, unnecessary in a sense. And the reason for that is because once the final piece is in place that allows you to change the timeline to Steinsgate, to the Steinsgate timeline, everything would just change in a snap, right? Mayurii and Suzuha would have never gone to the future in that case, right? Once they found a way to reach Steinsgate timeline, like all of that would have been completely nullified. There would have been no reason for Okabe to travel to, what was it, 18,000 years BC, 18,000 BC to rescue them, right? That would have been completely unnecessary. And I was thinking about this, like whether or not this was a piece of the puzzle, because maybe, it could still, as part of piece of the puzzle, they needed to make sure that they had a working time machine so that Suzuha could eventually travel back to the past from the future, and also set, the whole thing needs to be self-contained at least once, right? Sorry, not self-contained at least once, but it needs to be, the flow needs to be complete at least once from the beginning all the way to the end, right? At least once. However, even with that, there's lots of paradoxes here already. Like, for instance, we already see a little Suzuha in where Okabe left from, and so how exactly is he going to take Suzuha and Mayurii back to that timeline, right? That doesn't really make sense, and how can there be two Suzuhas? Or for instance, the fact that they are making it like that with Kagari being there and all, that's already a different future than the original future that Suzuha came from, to change everything, to set these things in motion, right? That's already a different timeline than what Suzuha originally originated from. So what's the deal with that, right? The timeline had already changed, you could say, once Suzuha reached the past. But in any case, it's whatever, right? Because I don't want to turn this into something where, we're arguing the semantics of the time travel and whatnot. At the end of the day, time travel is fiction, right? So I'm not going to completely disregard the story or disregard the series just because of some flaws within time travel logic. But I'm just saying, for me, the reason why I can't fully enjoy, for instance, the scene at the very end and so on and so forth, is because to me that doesn't really make sense in the first place. So just wanted to quickly throw this out there in terms of these thoughts. Now, okay, with that being said, let's talk about Steins;Gate Zero as a whole, right? So, some preface. Now, I know, obviously, I think anybody would know that it was a tall order to make this kind of series, right? Like, I don't have any pre-knowledge of the visual novel of the series, and so I don't exactly know. I didn't know when I started this how big the Steins;Gate Zero visual novel was, like how deep it goes or how expansive it gets, right? How much content is actually in there. Now, however, even disregarding all that, the difficulty for this series is already set very, very high because we already know the outcome, right? This is an alternative timeline series, and you are going into this with facing the fact that all of your viewers already know how it's going to end. And so how exactly are you going to make it entertaining, right? I guess in some ways you could sort of parallel this to historical series, where, we already know how history is going to eventually turn out, but how exactly are you going to make the story compelling and interesting enough for people to want to watch this and still be invested in the characters, even if we already know the outcome, right? And normally, in order to do that, you need to focus a lot on the characters, a lot on the character development, a lot on their interactions with each other, or you can try to make it so that, even though we reach the same kind of ending, the journey there was sort of unexpected, right? So or turning something on its head, and it's like, oh, so I thought it was a very simple case of going from A to B, but instead we went from A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then I'm sorry. For instance, normally you would say, okay, A to Z, it follows a logical progression, but instead of a straight line, we're like zigging, zagging back and forth and so on and so forth, and keeping the story interesting in order to reach that end goal, right? So it has to be either one of these kinds of things in order to keep it interesting. Now, with that being said, however, one of the biggest criticisms I could have of this series is that it's really trying to introduce too many characters and too many side plots without actually fully, properly explaining anything, right? And I think I mentioned this already numerous times before, and you guys have also told me, well, it's unfortunate because there's just so much to adapt, so much to do here, right? Like, just off the top of my head, Kaguri's backstory was never completely, like, I could foresee like at least 5 or 6 more episodes just talking about like what actually happened with Kaguri and her entire situation, and with the professor, and with Future Mayurii, like what exactly was her story, why does she look so much like Kurisu, and so on and so forth, right? Like that's one part. Amadeus Kurisu, I went into this series thinking that that was going to be like a huge point of the series, actually, and in the end, not really that much. She didn't really play that much of a role, right? Like, I did feel kind of sad in the last episode and whatnot, and I still do, actually, because I mentioned this in the last episode already, but Amadeus Kurisu is one of those characters that's never going to come back once we reach the happy ending, because she doesn't belong in the happy ending, right? So there's that part, and a lot of stuff in regards to her, we don't really know, and I had a lot of my questions as to what exactly was she doing during the scenes where the professor was showing his true colors and so on and so forth, right? Like that part. Even Maho, let's say Maho was one of the highlights of the series, definitely one of the main characters, but even her, we don't really spend that much time with her, right? We at most know that she has this sort of inferiority complex towards Kurisu, but beyond that, and like a sort of semi-crush on Okabe, right? But beyond that, and not to mention her semi-crush was also kind of kind of sudden in a way, and just really out there. So we didn't really get that much time to development with Maho as well. Or, for instance, the entire plotline of Stratford versus DARPA and whatnot, and then versus the Russians, and then does the CERN actually have anything to do with? I guess not, but it would have been nice to see. I feel like it would have been a nice sort of reference, if you will, if they could sort of like show us the power balance between these different organizations or whatnot. And for instance, you guys recall, like, what was it, I think it was before episode 10 or whatnot, or somewhere around there, the Russians or some other kind of entity managed to create a temporal device, right? Not really sure what it was, maybe a D-mail, maybe a time leap machine, maybe a time machine, and they managed to shift timelines, right? And yet that happened once, and then we never hear of it again. Like, that's just completely out there, right? And there's just so much interesting stuff there that they could have expanded on, and instead they tried to fit everything in, and I feel like the story just falls flat because of that. Or they could have gone another road, right? I believe I mentioned this in episode 21 or episode 20, where I mentioned they could have completely gone with a method of sort of exploring the stories of the future lab members. The lab members in the future, right? Like, completely disregard everything from 2010 and around that timeline, and instead show us the lives of the lab members if they did not go to the Steinsgate timeline in the 2020s, 2030s, right? That would have been completely fine with me as well. That would have been fun. We could have really, looked at their lives and how they were struggling to live their lives and whatnot, and sort of cement these sort of we need to reach the Steinsgate timeline, that kind of mentality, right? That I feel would have been also a much better decision than to make it sort of like this. Now, with that being said, I don't want to be too negative on this, right? Like, let's talk a little bit about the positives. So, what are the positives here? I guess this series because Kurisu is not here, it focused a lot more on Mayurii, right? And a lot more on her emotions towards Okabe, something that we did not actually see that much of in the original Steins Gate, at least for the anime. I'm not sure about the light novel. And we also gain a better understanding about the sacrifices that she had to make, and that is going to be permanent, in order to bring Okabe back, in order to bring Kurisu back, and in order for them to all reach the Steinsgate timeline, right? She is giving up the love of her life in order to do this. So she has also made this ultimate sacrifice, or you could even say that she's making the ultimate sacrifice for everyone in order to reach that sort of happy ending situation, right? So I did like that we got a little bit more in regards to that. And the character designs are cool. I'll be totally honest here. When I first saw the key visuals for Steins Zero, I was like, damn, they look awesome, right? And, we saw the other side of Okabe as well. Like, I'm sure a lot of people much more prefer the Hoin Kyoma type of Okabe. And don't get me wrong, I absolutely love his character as well, but it was nice seeing a sort of normal Okabe and, what exactly he's capable of and what exactly his personality is like if he, decided to be a normal person instead, right? I did like that, and dressing in all black and whatnot, he looked cool, man. He looked cool, and all the other characters as well. I think I fawned over this in the first few episodes already. I like their character designs there. And of course Maho's a nice addition, and it's really too bad that she's not going to be part of the regular gang, I guess you could say. Although, and here's another thing that I feel they didn't really do, and they could have done better. They could have shown a bit more, like what exactly happens to all these newer characters that joined us in Steins Gate Zero once they eventually reach the Steins Gate timeline, right? Like, I feel like that would have been something that would help at least satisfy the fans, right? Like, does Maho eventually still meet up with them in the future as well once they reach the Steins Gate timeline? What about Amadeus Kurisu, and so on, and what about Kagari, so on and so forth, right? So, you already take this time to introduce these characters, and some were introduced a little bit more, some were developed a little bit more than the others, but if you've already taken the time to make us invested into these characters, you should at least give us closure, right? And that's something that I felt was also missing here as well. So, yeah, but anyways, like I said, Maho's also a nice addition. She does sort of seem like another version of Kurisu, but still distinct differences there. I liked her character as well, and she's a nice addition. And so what else? I was actually pretty hyped for the first two episodes, not gonna lie, because, it's just this fresh feeling, right? It's very different from the original Steins Gate, even in the very first episode. The feel and tone of the different characters, they had these new designs, and then you could also get the sense of an ominous shadow looming over everyone, particularly over Okabe, the sadness that he represented and so on and so forth. But that was something different, right? So, and then you add the fact that we still get Kurisu back in Amadeus form and whatnot. Like, for me, with no knowledge at all of how the visual novel actually went, I was like, oh man, this is actually turning to be a pretty epic story in of its own. And then it sort of got bogged down by, by the midpoint of it, with too many side stories and too many characters being introduced. Like, I gotta be honest, I feel like the series, for me anyways, took a turn for the downwards once Kagari was introduced, and then we had this entire situation with her as well. And then, the fact that I was completely thinking that maybe Amadeus Kurisu and this Kagari, they're sort of related in some sort of way, and then not really so in the end. And at that point, I just felt like the plot really got too convoluted with all the different stuff it was trying to do in order for me to properly enjoy it. And so yeah, like, you guys have been following me for quite some time now. If you've watched it so far, you should know that I don't really sugarcoat things. I had criticisms of the original Steins Gate as well. I'm not afraid to voice it. Steins Gate Zero, like, if it wasn't for the fact that I wanted to see where exactly the series ended, Well, actually, I think that's a little bit harsh. I feel like I would have still watched it till the end there, even if it was just an independent series. But definitely, I can see why it's not on the same level as the original Steins Gate. Like, that was a self-contained good story, right? Good pacing, good characters, good plot, so on and so forth. This one, I don't know. I guess at the end of the day, probably this series should be viewed more as a fan service series for fans of the series, and not really for somebody like me who's only looking at this anime only and who's getting into the franchise in this way, right? I feel like this would have made much more sense and be much more enjoyable if you were already a fan of the visual novels and then you want to see it in anime form, right? And perhaps there's some Easter eggs being hidden in here. I don't really know, but I presume there would have been, right? Because all in all, it does feel much more like a series made for fans than it is for a viewer like me. And so, yeah, that's pretty much it. What I think about Steins Gate Zero as a whole. And man, that was a 20-minute review as well. But, so yeah, there we go. That was Steins Gate Zero, and this series has come to an end. Next up, I will be starting a new series, although I might be watching some movies first, using the opened up time slot. Not really sure which series I'm doing next. Some of you have suggested Code Geass. And I feel like that is also a nice little, series to put into this time slot, but we'll see, right? We'll see. I haven't entirely decided on this yet. But anyways, for those of you who have been watching this all the way here, thanks for joining along the ride. Feel free to watch my other series as well. All the usual, subscribe, blah blah blah, and good stuff. I don't really do that kind of thing, so if you want to watch. If you don't, well, I'll see you next time when the timing is right. So, anyways. Hope you guys enjoyed this so far. See you guys next time, hopefully. This is Mayurii, signing off.